sobering finding. Here's some lessons of that research. Government standards work. Going back to that survey of fatalities, remember how most of them were not caused by a direct violation of a government standard. That shows that government standards work. When we had a new standard for confined spaces, deaths from that cause dropped dramatically. When we had a new standard for lockout-tagout, deaths from lockout-tagout dropped dramatically, to the point where people tend to get killed doing things that aren't covered by government standards. A good example of that is the steel industry, where the single largest cause of death by traumatic injury in the steel industry is in-plant railroads. In-plant railroads. You know, you got hot metal, you got other moving machinery, you got all kinds of ways to get killed in the steel plant, but the leading cause of death is in-plant railroads. There isn't an OSHA standard for in-plant railroads. The FRA, Federal Railroad Administration, doesn't cover in-plant railroads. No standards. OSHA has standards for industrial helicopters, but not for in-plant railroads. And people die from that cause. Second lesson, job safety analysis, or SJPs or SOPs or whatever you call them in your workplace. A formal comprehensive analysis of the job and how to do it right. They work when they're practical, when they deal with a real situation and understood. Remember again, a lot of those fatalities, there was no such thing as a JSA or an SJP or an SOP for that particular job that got somebody killed. Third, it's better to focus on hazards than on behavior. Hazards were there in every single case. Behavior by the worker contributing to the accident in a much smaller number. Training needs to be improved, especially as jobs change. Remember that people who were killed disproportionately were people who had been in the plant a long time, but who had been a short time in the job they were doing when they were killed. So training needs to be improved. One of the things about that, by the way, is as jobs change in the industry, in every industry, and we're going through a massive round of technological change and job changes and job combinations, much of it caused by globalization and economic pressure. More people find themselves in that circumstance than ever before, having been in the plant for some time, been in that workplace for some time, but the job they're doing now is different than what they did last year or the year before. More people in that circumstance. And safety evaluation of technological change needs to be improved. Here's a really important one. Monthly walkarounds don't spot the things that get people killed. They're useful. They may spot things that get people injured. They may make sure that the guarding is still there. They may make sure the housekeeping's right, and that's important stuff. But it takes more than a monthly walk-around to spot the things that get people killed. Behavioral observations or observation programs where a worker or a manager goes out and kind of observes somebody doing the job, they don't work either for fatalities unless you happen to be lucky or unlucky enough to be there exactly when that hazardous situation occurs. Workers doing the job are the only ones that can effectively spot unusual hazards. If there is an unusual hazard, if there is something that happens intermittently, if it is that crazy maintenance procedure on the third turn at 3 in the morning, chances are there isn't going to be a safety person around. So it's the worker themselves, himself or herself, who's got to spot that and do something about it. And finally, we need to do a lot better on designing safe jobs. That's pretty clear, I think. Here are a few principles that we think are important for every single safety program. First, you can't base the program on OSHA compliance, and I should have added to that MSHA compliance or compliance with equivalent Canadian standards. It's important. Those standards work. It's important to comply with them, but if that's all you do, you're not doing enough. Second, you can't rely too much on injury rates. One of the things we found is that when people, the kind of things that cause fatalities are often different than the kinds of things that cause injuries. Everybody who's taken a safety class has probably seen an iceberg or a triangle, and at the tip of that triangle or pyramid there are fatalities, and then as you move down there are serious injuries, and then minor injuries, and then near misses, And the idea is they're all the same. Really, they're not all the same. What we found is that people get injured often doing things that are routine, but they get killed doing things that are non-routine. So you can't rely a lot on injury rates to see what's safe and unsafe in the workplace. One of the things that we talk about in the union, you can't be afraid of conflict because it means people care. Talk more about that later on. You got to analyze every job. You got to analyze the job as it occurs instead of how some manager, I shouldn't have said it that way, some top manager sitting in some office somewhere designing the equipment thought it ought to occur. You got to analyze it the way it really occurs, what really happens out there, what people really do, instead of what the engineer back in the home office thinks they do or wants them to do. You got to involve everybody in analyzing and fixing jobs, because no one person's going to have all of the knowledge that it takes to do that effectively. You got to treat employees as the solution and not as the problem. That's critical, because again, we need to enlist everybody in this enterprise. We need people to think about, what is it I'm doing that's safe, what's unsafe, are there hazards here that can be controlled? You know, stop, look, and listen. People need to do that. And if you keep telling people you are the problem, then they're going to resent it. And they're not going to feel like they're part of the solution. That's especially important for us in the union. Our whole message to our membership is that you are part of the solution. If we start saying, as the union, we think you, the members, are part of the problem, then I'm not sure we deserve to represent them. And I think that goes for management as well, and for how people ought to treat their employees. That means we got to lose the word behavior. Remember when we were kids, Mom and Dad talked about behavior. It was never a good thing, right? So when we design programs and say this is a behavioral program, you immediately turn people off. It doesn't mean you shouldn't look at unsafe acts. It doesn't mean you shouldn't look at how people do the job. It doesn't mean you shouldn't design SJPs. But when you start talking about behavior, it's a bad word, and you're already 2 steps behind. We got to look for unsafe conditions first, and then look for unsafe acts. When looking at unsafe acts, we got to say not only, you did something unsafe, but why did you do it? And what made you do that? We say you got to ask why 5 times. Why did you take that guard off? Well, because I couldn't get the job done any other way. Well, why couldn't you get the job done any other way? Well, because it's the way the machine's designed. Well, why is the machine designed that way? That may not be something you ask the